If you have big problems, you'd better pray. That's what we come to today in the 12th chapter of the book of Acts. Trouble is really never that far away from any of us. We're not aware when it is crouching at our door, but it's there. And if you're not in trouble this morning, blessings upon you, but hang on. I remember when I was in seminary, a young man, and was taking a Christian ministry course, which talked about how to do everything from baptism to burials to just ministering to people in the hospital. And the professor made some sort of a statement to the effect of one of the things that you will find as a pastor, as a minister, is that you will be able to minister at least out of a well of your own difficulties, your own sorrows, your own troubles. I went up to him, I thought about that as the class went on, and I went up to him after the class, and I said, Dr. Brister, I'll be honest with you. I've just been blessed in my life. I really haven't had any major, serious, life-threatening problems. And his statement was to me, just hang on. And it was prophetic in the sense that that next year, it won't go into all the details, was really one of the hardest years for Lenny and I, and all these things began to happen with our young child and all these other things that came along, and it was a very difficult year. And I understood then more about what he was saying, is that the rain falls on the just and the unjust, we've heard it say. That difficult times come for all of us. Job said, for man is born for trouble and sparks fly upward. Jesus said, in this world you will, not you might, but you will have tribulation. The 12th chapter of Acts, in some cases, concludes a long section that we've been looking at, because starting in chapter 13, there's a pivot. The locale transfers from Jerusalem to more towards looking towards Rome. To this point, the church was growing. There were barriers that were there, but barriers such as ethnic and national barriers had been broken down. They were experiencing a relative bit of peace. Certainly the martyrdom of Stephen had shocked them all, and it was foretelling what was to come in this chapter 12. But generally speaking, within the church itself, there was peace and harmony and understanding, and the church was growing and expanding exponentially. And then in chapter 12, we come to a vicious attack that must have shocked them to their very core, reminiscent of Stephen's martyrdom. But the events of this chapter were very, very hard for the people, for the church, for the gathering of God's people to understand. They began to pray for strength in the face of the opposition. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Acts chapter 12. You can read behind on the screen as we look at these big problems that they were facing and how they prayed, in fact, to deal with them. About that time, Herod the king, he was a puppet king of Rome, but had some degree of authority there in the area. About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. So this was not just on one, but it was a concerted effort to try to reach out and to bring harm to the church. Verse 2, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of the unleavened bread. And when he had seized him, he put him into prison, delivering him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him to the people. So Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer was made for him to God by the church. The scriptures say earnest prayer. It's fervent prayer. It's intense prayer. It was actually in the verb form, it meant to stretch out the muscle, to stretch out, to in agony and pain. It's the same word that was used to describe Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. You see, the church was shaken to its core, and it required intense, earnest, fervent prayer. When James was killed, James, the brother of John, James was one of the apostles. To this point, none of the apostles had been harmed, and certainly none of them had been beheaded. At this point, many believed in the church, or many believed that the church thought at the time that the apostles sort of had a divine coverage, a protection over them. And so when James was brought in and killed, they were shaken to the core. How could this happen? What does this mean? Where is God in all of this? And then later, when Peter was arrested just to follow, they assumed that the same was going to happen to him. Here are 2 apostles, 2 of the very leaders of the early church that were arrested, and one was already put to death, and then the other was going to wait until after the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. And he too would meet the same fate. Shouldn't have come as a surprise, because John and his brother James went to Jesus, you remember in Mark chapter 10, somewhere around in there, and said, hey, we want to be your chief deputies. We want to be your chief lieutenants. And Jesus said, you don't even know what you're asking for. Because what you're asking for is you're going to go through the same baptism, i.e. you're going to be killed, you're going to have the same death that I did. They were told that they were going to have to sacrifice their lives with their own in service to Christ. But the truth is, here they were in a place, a difficult place, and the church began to earnestly pray for them. Verse 6, now when Herod was about to bring him out, on that very night, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries before the door were guarding the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side. I kind of picture it as, get up, Peter. The angel kicking him in the side. I don't know if that's true or not. He struck Peter on the side and woke him, and saying, get up quickly. And the chains fell off his hands. The angel said to him, dress yourself and put on your sandals. And he did so. And he said to him, wrap your cloak around you and follow me. And he went out and followed him. He did not know that what was being done by the angel was real. He thought he was seeing a vision. And when he passed the first and the second guard, they came to an iron gate leading into the city. And it opened for them on its own accord. And the Greek word is the word we get automated for. It automated. It opened automatically by itself. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel left him. When Peter came to himself, he said, now I'm sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting. When he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose other name was Mark. You'll see him later in Acts, where they had gathered together and were praying. And when he knocked at the door of the gateway, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. Recognizing Peter's voice, in her joy, she didn't open the gate. She ran in, reported that Peter was standing at the gate. They said to her, you're out of your mind. But she kept insisting it was so. And they kept saying it's his angel. It's just, they believed in those days that there was a guardian angel that would follow you around. There's some evidence of that being accurate. But Peter continued knocking. And when they opened, they saw him, and they were amazed. I kind of like that little phrase. I won't take time to look at it too much, but it's kind of funny. They were fervently praying, but their faith was not so fervent. And they were amazed that their prayers were answered. Have you ever done that? Prayed for something, all of a sudden, wait a minute. How did that happen? Verse 17, but motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had brought him out of prison. And he said, tell these things to James and to the brothers. And then he departed and went to another place. And now when day came, there was no little disturbance among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. And after Herod searched for him and did not find him, he examined the sentries and ordered that they should be put to death. And then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and spent time there. There's two problems that we have to deal with in this account. Two problems that are very common. The first problem is the big problem of death. As we've said, Herod Agrippa, he laid hands on James, one of the sons of thunder, and had him beheaded. He was a dearly loved follower of Christ, one of the apostles. And to the cheers of all the Jews that were looking on, James was executed without even being given an opportunity to speak for himself. The event cut to the very marrow of the bone of the early church, like a dagger. For many times the apostles had been persecuted, but none of them had lost their lives to this point. They had continued to serve God, continued to be faithful in building his word, and now it was as if the hand of God had withdrawn. It was as if the hand of God had been taken away. They were confused. Now the apostles were also fair game as well. You've experienced that, no doubt. Death of an important leader, death of a loved one, death of a movement, death of a dream that you had. Peter was arrested. No doubt they thought the same thing was going to be happening to them. In fact, it was the same time of the year that Jesus himself had been crucified. And so all of those thoughts were going off in their minds, and yet Peter himself was also told by the Lord, you will die yourself. You will be executed by your enemies. The problem of death is a difficult one to wrestle with. Why? What about here? What about there? The problem of death is so hard because we say, I had this dream, I had this wonderful idea, and yet here it is. What should I do about it? It's so final. We don't have all the answers. And so it leads to the second problem that we see here in this same account. It's the problem of why. They go hand in hand together. Now, this story actually is a little peculiar in a sense. It's peculiar in the sense that Peter's part ends rather oddly. After he's rescued, he motions for silence and he begins to tell them all that had happened. And after he explains, the Bible just sort of says that he left there, that he tells them what had happened, and then he departs. And the truth of the matter is, when you look throughout the book of Acts, Peter is not featured very much anymore after this. In verse 15, he's mentioned in a situation there, but it seems as if he almost goes into hiding. There are so many questions. Why? Why, if God could save an angel to save Peter, why didn't he send one to save James? Why did that happen? James had been faithful. James had been godly. Why was his life taken? And there's no explanation. Why? Why didn't Peter's release from prison lead to another expression of public ministry? We saw earlier when Peter was put in prison, he comes out and what does he do? He begins to preach the gospel boldly, and people get saved, and all sorts of things start happening positively for the church. But in this case, he goes into the room where they're hiding out and praying, and he tells them what's going on, and then he just departs. We don't know. Peter, what happened? The thing that's so striking to me is that questions like this go unanswered. I want to know why, we say. And yet if you look through the scriptures, the Lord rarely gives us answers to that why question. We don't always get all the information that we desire. James was martyred. Peter was rescued. Why? The reasons that God does things or does not do them are often known really only to Him. We do know that James, now in glory, is benefit. Paul himself said to me, to live as Christ, to die as gain. He goes earlier, he said, I don't know which one to choose. Not his choice. It's better for me to be with Christ. I don't understand those why. God doesn't give us those answers very often. But God does answer a very important question for us. And that is who? Who? And that who is Christ. That who is the promises of Christ that sustains us, that is the beginner, the sustainer, and the end of our story. That we live for Christ and we die in Him. The place of why, in the place of that, we get the love of God. I don't know why. The tapestry is very chaotic on the backside. My mom used to love to do needlepoint when she was alive. And we've got some of her things, and she had them, a lot of them framed, and would give them to us. And through the years, frames get broke, and glass gets broken. When you pull them out, and you look at them on the other side, it's a mess, right? That's life. It's a mess sometimes. We don't understand it. It doesn't look like it could be anything at all good. But on the other side, it's right where it should be. The tapestry is complete. Difficult questions. These questions of death and why, but they're not answered. But here are some more important observations about the story that help us to face these big problems, and they all revolve around prayer. First of all is this: prayer does bring peace of God. Peter was asleep. It's interesting. He was asleep, sound asleep, shackled between two guards, knowing that tomorrow he was going to die. Here he was, these Roman guards who were experts at killing, and chained to him. Jesus, as I mentioned in John chapter 16, verse 33, says, I've said these things to you that in me you may have peace. The world will give you tribulation, but take heart. I've overcome the world. The thing that's so striking to me there is that Jesus doesn't tell us why the world gives us tribulation or how can we get out or avoid that tribulation. He just simply says you will have tribulation. The world gives you tribulation, but here's what Jesus gives you. He gives you peace. There he is, the night before he was executed, as far as he would know, and Peter's asleep, so asleep that an angel has to kick him in the side to wake him up. Wake up, get out. It's the sort of peace that Jesus gives us in the midst of tribulation, in the midst of threats and anxieties and dangers. We need not fear death because of Jesus. We need not have anxiety in life being cut short because of Jesus. We don't have to have regrets in relationships that are hurt or destroyed because of Jesus. There's no uncertainty that we might think that evil might actually win because we know who wins. We know who is overcome. At the end of the day, God can be trusted. God can be trusted in all these things, and we can rest in that. You perhaps can recall and remember times when you were a child and fearful, and just be able to reach up and grab that hand of that loving mother or father, and it seemed like everything just would flow away. It's a simple thing, and we know as adults now, there's nothing magical about that hand, but it's that peace which comes through presence. Prayer does that for us. If we were to, if we don't know these things, but what if we all would have this message that came over your phone, oh, tonight is your last night on this earth. We can have peace. Peace in prayer to the Lord. Prayer is also fueled by a passion for God. Verse 5, as we've noted, tells us that the church had gathered together. They were in earnest prayer for him, for Peter. The church. I got to be honest with you. It is hard at times to pray earnestly, passionately, when you're by yourself. Or let's put it this way, it is harder. It's possible. Jesus certainly did in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's our model. But it's been my experience anyway that when people are gathered together in prayer, that it is much more applicable to being praying for in earnest, in intensity. Lenny and I have been a part of a prayer group that meets once a month, every month. We've done that for the last 12, 13 years. And that small group of prayers that gather together, it's among the most earnest prayer that we have of the month. This is what the church is. They were fueled by passion. They were fueled by the passion, earnestly coming together. That kind of prayer is not trying to persuade or beg a reluctant God, but rather that kind of prayer, that earnest prayer, is the kind of prayer that says, I'm passionate about the same things that God is passionate about. Which really brings me to the third point with regards to prayer, and that is that prayer recognizes the purpose of God. Our prayers, my prayer, I can't speak for you, my prayer is often, hey God, take this pain out of my back, or take this pain out of my life, or take this pain, take this situation away from me. I want to be comfortable. And that's human nature. No reason to feel guilty about that. I'm not bringing that up to make you feel guilty this morning. But what I am saying is that passion, the prayer that is fueled by passion, prayer that experiences the peace of God, is the kind of prayer that recognizes the purpose of God, is really what we want. It's not what we think we need or we want, but it really is what we want, what we need, what we must have. Lord, may your purpose be done. So for these people of prayer there at the church praying for Peter, certainly they wanted Peter released because he was their friend. There's nothing wrong with Lord, release him. But behind it all, the prayer that focuses upon the purpose of God says, Lord, do something that will show others your glory. Do something that will show people your glory. The scriptures say, may God be gracious to us and bless us, that your ways may be known on the earth and your salvation among the nation. God, do something to show us your glory. Lord, use my problems to open doors to the gospel. Use the problems that I've faced to be able to share with others that face the same problems. We live in a fallen world. We live in a world filled with sin, with bad, evil things and bad, evil people. Lord, use whatever problems that I'm facing for your glory. Lord, use my problems to bring me closer to you. Oftentimes we go through entire days, if not weeks, somewhat oblivious to God's care and his protection over us, his love for us. Lord, help me to stop my busy life and to recognize that these issues, these big problems may be bringing me closer to you. Lord, bring peace out of all that's happening. There's some things that are important to know. There are other things that we think are important to know. But here's what I do know, and here's what I can tell from this passage. The Bible tells us that we will have big problems. That early church had a big problem on their hands. James was beheaded. Peter was arrested. Others would follow. In fact, we know, church history teaches us and tells us, that every apostle, save John the Apostle, died a martyr's death. John died in prison on Patmos, most believe. Big problems lie before us. God said through his prophet Isaiah, the Lord of hosts has sworn, saying, as I have planned, so it shall be. Some of those problems come because God is going to use that for glory, for purposes beyond what we can ever ask or imagine. Does it mean that all things are good? No. But it does mean that God uses those good things for his glory. And that is our prayer. That the purpose of God may somehow be hidden in it. We don't know that specific purpose. We don't know how God can be in it. There are things that happen I will never be able to explain. I will never be able to answer the whys. As a pastor, I've spent untold number of times on a hospital bed or in a home or at a scene and tried to answer the question, why? And I had no answers. A few years ago, you may remember I was pastoring in First Baptist Church at Dandridge at the time, and I was in my office, and I looked out this large window that had in the office there, and I saw black smoke rising from the horizon.